Dave Allen versus Lenroy Thomas. 12 rounds for the Commonwealth heavyweight title. This is Dave Allen's World Cup final. This is the biggest fight of Dave Allen's life. He's had fights against better known opponents before, Luis Ortiz, Dillian Whyte, etc. But this is a fight where he starts as a big favourite. He's 1-4 on with the bookmakers. He's fancied to win. He's the home fighter. He's the one who's working with Eddie Hearn. He's fighting close to home. And, this is his big opportunity, you feel, to win a major title in the heavyweight division. The Commonwealth title, it's not the greatest belt in the world. But Lenroy Thomas is perhaps one of the more beatable type opponents that you could get fighting for it. And you'd have to say that Dave Allen is in with a very, very live chance of winning this fight. I've been interviewing Dave Allen on this channel for a long time. I've been watching his fights for even longer. I'm a fan of him as an individual, fan of him as a fighter, and I'm totally hope that he gets the job done on Saturday night and can, have a defining moment before hopefully moving on to an even bigger fight. And you would think that this is a real opportunity for him. When I first heard that Dave Allen was fighting Lenroy Thomas, if I'm honest, I couldn't instantly recollect having watched Lenroy Thomas box before. And sometimes you get fighters fighting for these kind of belts, and they don't really turn out to be up to much. So I had a look at him on BoxRec and tried to track down some of his fights. 20 wins, 4 losses. He's been stopped 3 times. BoxRec have him as the 117th ranked heavyweight in the world. And I had a look at his resume, and he lost on debut. He lost to an 11-9 fighter. He lost to Dominic Breazeale when Breazeale was 5-0. He lost to Andrei Fedosov 2 fights ago, and he's had a comeback fight since then. So I kind of looked at him, and I thought, he doesn't really have any notable wins. Every time he stepped up, even if it was against a 5-0 Dominic Breazeale or an Andrei Fedosov, etc., he's been knocked out. And I kind of thought maybe Dave Allen has been well matched here, and maybe Eddie Hearn has found a very, very, very good spot to steer Dave Allen to a relatively easy Commonwealth title. But when I actually looked up Lenroy Thomas and watched some of the footage of him fighting, I was actually surprised. The guy is not bad at all. He's a capable boxer. He's a southpaw, I believe. He's not the biggest heavyweight in the world. He's probably a smaller man than David Allen. Certainly, height-wise, I don't think he's the biggest. But he can actually box. He's got decent hand speed for his size. He's got a decent jab for his size. He can put punches together. He's not just the sort of a bouncer who's a big guy who's knocked over some low level of opposition. He is a guy who, has put 1 or 2. He's got some decent skills in there. And looking at Lenroy Thomas, he's actually a fighter who stylistically, I believe, could cause Dave Allen quite a bit of problems. If you look at Dave Allen and you look at where he's come up short in his career, the fights against Luis Ortiz and Dillian Whyte are obvious examples. You could maybe even look back to that Jason Gavern fight and see that he struggled at times with Gavern, and Gavern being slightly awkward, and sometimes Gavern was actually beating him to the jab in that fight, in the early rounds specifically. And you kind of look at Dave Allen and you look at some of those struggles that he had earlier on in his career, and you could see Lenroy Thomas causing very similar problems, especially if Lenroy Thomas can start moving and establish his jab earlier on in this fight. It wouldn't surprise me if Lenroy Thomas actually nicked some early rounds just by fighting a moving, jabbing game. Certainly if you look at the early rounds against Dominic Breazeale and some of his other fights, if he comes with that sort of attack, and if he fights like that, you could see him taking rounds off Dave Allen. Most certainly, I do believe that this is a competitive fight. Lenroy Thomas is not a walkover. He is a talent, and he may even be the better pure boxer in there in terms of jab and move and that type of thing. However, having said all of that, David Allen is probably a worthy favourite in terms of the bookmakers' markets. We talk about momentum a hell of a lot on this channel, but David Allen is a guy who's really full of momentum at present. He's subsequent to the loss, which he suffered at the hands of Luis Ortiz, he's come back, he started working with Eddie Hearn, and he scored very, very early knockouts in his 2 comeback fights against David Howe and against Lucas Rutsevitz. Now, I think those 2 knockout wins and early knockout wins have kind of given him a bit of a, they're kind of trying to market Dave Allen as a puncher and saying that he's a big puncher. I think those 2 wins are maybe deceptive on that front. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Dave Allen's feather-fisted, but I don't think of Dave Allen as a puncher when I see him box. For me, he's a guy who is more of a boxer as opposed to a puncher, if you like. And those fights only lasted a round or 2. They were both quite early stoppages for Dave Allen. So Lenroy Thomas is going to be a big step up. But Dave Allen's younger, he's full of momentum, and I've got some doubts over Lenroy Thomas. I'm told that he only actually turned up to the UK yesterday, which isn't really a good sign in terms of jet lag and in terms of preparation and that sort of thing. If you were just turning up for a payday, which potentially Lenroy Thomas is, I guess turning up a few days before the fight is what you do. If you were turning up legitimately hoping to win, I guess you'd turn up a week, 2 weeks earlier, like Errol Spencer's done, for example, to give yourself time to acclimatise to the jet lag and that type of thing. So that's a concern for me when we look at Lenroy Thomas. He's also been a sparring partner of Anthony Joshua fairly extensively, as I understand it. And whenever that happens, I kind of wonder whether that means that Team Hearn and Team Matchroom have an insight into a fighter's capabilities. It was exactly the same when Mariusz Wok was announced as Dillian Whyte's opponent, and I know that fight no longer is happening because Whyte had an injury, but when that fight was made, I was expecting that Eddie Hearn and Matchroom had an insight into Mariusz Wok's capability at this stage of his career based on sparring with Joshua, and they probably made a calculated decision that Dillian Whyte would beat him from what they'd seen in training camp. I suspect it's very possible there's something similar here. Anthony Joshua is clearly the golden apple of Matchroom, and I suspect they monitor his training camps, his sparring partners closely, and they've probably had a good look at Lenroy Thomas. Probably had a much closer look than any of us have from the little bits available of him on YouTube. And maybe they've made a calculated decision that he's either not in very good shape or he's simply not very good, and they expect that a guy like David Allen has more to offer than him and can get him beat. So that's my second doubt on Lenroy Thomas. My third doubt on Lenroy Thomas is, for me, he does seem to have a tendency to quit. I can't remember which fight it was, maybe the Fedosov fight. I'm not going to say he quit, maybe that's too harsh, but certainly he was hurt in that fight, and I felt he could have made more of a case for continuing, let's put it that way. It seemed that his will and his spirit was broken when he realised that he was up against a guy who was maybe had a little bit more against him that day. So yeah, I've got 3 reasons to doubt Lenroy Thomas. 1, the fact he's turned up so late. 2, the fact that maybe he's faded out of fights disappointingly when he stepped up in levels. And 3, the fact that because he's that Anthony Joshua sparring partner, I kind of have an insight that maybe Eddie Hearn and Matchroom know a lot more about him, and having had a closer look at him than any of us, they think he's easy work for Dave Allen. But having watched some of his fights, I watched his last fight against Grover Young. He's not superbly conditioned by any stretch of the imagination, but for me, I do think he would be the best opponent Dave Allen's beaten to date. I do think he's probably more of a challenge than Jason Gaverne. I do think he's probably more of a challenge than Fabrice Auriang, and both of those guys cause Dave Allen real problems. So I think this is the biggest win of Allen's career to date if he is able to get it there, and I think it's a very, very, very close fight, really. I do. When I look at Lenroy Thomas, I don't think he's necessarily got the power to knock out David Allen. I think David Allen's got an exceptional chin, and he's also got some defensive awareness in there as well. I do think he has the potential to steal rounds if he can box and move. I think Allen is potentially vulnerable to a guy who establishes that jab and boxes and jabs with lateral movement. But has Lenroy Thomas, this is a 12-round fight, and Allen's a fit man. He's in the best shape I've seen him. He looked very good on the pad yesterday at the public workout. For me, he looked faster, he looked slightly leaner in there as well, so he's trained hard, he's taken this seriously. So it's a 12-round fight. Allen's the younger man, Allen's been the more active man, Allen's had the more notice, one would presume. And you've just got to wonder, as this fight gets into the later rounds or even the middle rounds, is Lenroy Thomas going to start to have his stamina sapped? And with his potential to maybe find ways out of fights, let's put it that way, I certainly feel like in the Fedosov fight, or maybe you could look at the Brazil fight, he could have lasted longer. Will someone like Dave Allen be able to turn on the gas on him in the middle to late rounds, grind him out of there, break his spirit and get the win? I think it's very, very, very possible. But if Lenroy Thomas turns up in prime physical condition with huge will to win and boxes smart, then I think it could be a tight fight, and I think it could be a fight that goes the distance and is very, very close. I view this as a competitive fight. I genuinely do view this as a fight that could go either way. I'm going to side with David Allen. I want David Allen to win, and I think there is a real suggestion that this is David Allen's time. He's got all the momentum. This is his big night of his career. He's trained hard for it. He's in shape for it, and there are enough reasons to doubt Lenroy Thomas for me to think that David Allen is the more likely winner out of the two. If Lenroy Thomas turns up looking in shape, looking determined, and he starts getting that jab working from the first round, it could be a tough night. But I don't know if Lenroy Thomas is going to be able to pursue that and fight to those tactics for a 12-round fight. I don't know how his will is going to hold when he's hit and when the fight gets tough. And I don't think he's got the power to knock out David Allen. So assuming it goes to the judges, hard to see him getting any favours in Sheffield. Let me know your thoughts, guys. Who do you think is going to win this fight? I will say that I'm planning to do live commentary on this fight and the Jamie Cox fight, which will be a live stream as the boxing's going live. So please do hit subscribe if you haven't done already, so you can check that out, as well as all of my post-fight coverage as well. If you've enjoyed it, as I say, hit the thumbs up button and leave your comments in the section below. Many thanks for